I am a huge fan of Disney songs. Actually, I have a playlist on Spotify that I play time and again, and it's all these famous songs from the Disney movies that I watched when I was a child, up until the movies that I still watch today. And I'm sure that there will be new songs added to that playlist in the years to come, because Disney is not done storytelling anytime soon. Some of these songs, when I first heard them, I just fell in love with their melody and with the context of the story in which they were sung. But over time, some of these songs would take up on a different meaning for me, because they came to my mind in situations where I was looking for consolation, for comfort, for a song that could help me to change my mood. And I remember one of those songs being the song that Little Mermaid sings when she is this is in the beginning of the story, and she's longing to know what life is all about out there, away from the sea, on the land, where people have, what do you call these things? Feet up where they are. That became a song for me that has really helped me when I was going through a tough time in my first parish, where I felt a little bit like Ariel, in a situation where it was oppressing and I felt almost imprisoned, and I had to constantly obey the people of the parish that were having such huge expectations of what I should do. And I felt that there was almost no freedom. I had to comply. I had to conform to their idea of what a priest should do and what he shouldn't do. And that song for me became just such a source of inspiration, because I felt the same. You know, it resonated in me, because I also longed to be out of this world, in a different world, escape from all these obligations, escape from all the judgment, just like Ariel feels judged by her parents or by her father, and by all the kind of unwritten rules of living under the sea, and she longs for another existence. And that song really helped me in these dark moments where I started to doubt really if this was truly what God wanted. And I was hoping that one day I'd be free. I could just walk wherever I wanted. And I'm sure that you must have similar songs, maybe not just Disney, but songs that have got this almost magical impact, that when you hear them, it transports you back in time, or it lifts you up right away, no matter how down you feel or how dark the world seems. When you hear that music, you start to smile, you start to sing along. That's the power of music. And it's also one of the reasons, I think, why in the Bible, when they talk about heaven, there's so much singing going on. It's unbelievable. I mean, we have, of course, our biblical songs, the Psalms, one of which we just read it during Mass, because, well, I'm not just good with the harp. But there's a lot of singing in the Bible. But there is even more singing in heaven, because songs, in a way, you could say, are a gift of heaven. It's something that has more layers sometimes than just prose and just written text or text that we read out loud. When we sing it, we add melody, we add music, and it starts to evoke something that goes way beyond the text itself, the lyrics itself. And that's true for all art. True art always has that what we call a transcendental dimension. So it says something about this life, but also almost always promises something of the life to come. But anyway, this is the power of music and the power of songs to lift us up, to give us almost like supernatural strength or hope that comes from heaven. This is something that we hope for in times of distress, that we feel that we have those moments that are uplifting. And in the Bible, this is kind of a bit of a tricky transition to make to the readings of today, but in the readings of today, especially the first one and the gospel reading, we encounter situations where the future is full of gloom, where the people in the story are afflicted by fear, by uncertainty. And they need, without knowing it, they need help in that situation. Because if they're just left alone, the future doesn't seem to offer any hope. And well, in the first reading, it's clear this is about Abram. So this is one of the oldest stories that we have in the Bible. And Abram, as you may know, was called by God to leave everything behind. So it's like the ultimate vocation story. God calls Abram to leave his country, to leave the life that he had, and to join God on an adventure and to go to a new place, a new land, to build up a new future where it's not Abram who is in charge, but it's God who gives him that future as a gift. And Abraham, in that situation, even though he tries to do what God tells him to do, and he's praised for that because he doesn't really see how it's all going to happen because, he's just Abraham. Who is he? He doesn't even have children. How can God talk about this amazing future when, there's, at least from a human point of view, there is really no reason to think that whatever God talks about is actually going to happen. But at least he tries to believe. But nevertheless, he still has his questions. And what I like so much about the character of Abram is he doesn't hide his feelings. He doesn't hide his questions. He just asks them to God. So there is a certain kind of intimacy between him and God that he is just very courageous, and he asks God, this country, this land that you are going to give me, right? You asked me to leave my own land and you were going to give me a new land. How do I know that that's going to happen? And then God gives him a bit of a cryptic answer. So at first he brings him outside and it's dark, it's night. And he asks him to look up to the skies and to count the stars. Kind of a strange answer. And then God promises Abram, you will have children, you will have grandchildren, you will have grandchildren, and all these generations will be as numerous as the stars that you can count in the skies. So this future is not just what you may have one day dreamt of. I'd love to have a few kids and maybe some grandchildren. No, what I'm going to give you is way bigger than anything you can imagine, just as you can't count the stars. That is how you cannot fathom what I have in store for you. The only thing I want you to do is to trust, to believe. And then Abram is still apparently not reassured enough, because there is a second part of this story where God gives him, again, very cryptic instructions. He has to go and search a few animals, and they're specified. And they're just very normal animals, especially in those times where everyone had a few animals just to survive. You would use the animals for eggs, chickens, or milk, or just to eat them. And so God asks Abram to fetch a couple of those animals. That is actually quite something to ask of someone for who this livestock may be a way to survive. God asks him to make a sacrifice of those animals. And that's not obvious. Abram was not rich. He was not in a situation where he had enough to just give. No, this was probably quite a gift that God asked him. And then there are a couple of things that Abram does that actually refer to a certain ritual that was performed in those times. And we know this from historians. This was not just exclusive to this Bible story, but this was also something that was done in between tribes, for instance. And it was a ceremony of agreement. So if you would want to strike a deal with someone, it wasn't just a promise. No, you had to perform a ritual that you would remember. And this ritual involved cutting these animals into pieces, and you would place them in two rows. And together they would form basically a road, symbolizing, we are going to go together on this road to the future. We will have a pact. And it is a blood bond. If I break this deal, then this blood should remind me of the fact that, I'm breaking something that is of vital importance. It's literally, a blood bond, as we see in other cultures and stories as well. So it was meant to convince both parties of the unbreakable importance of this bond. And so Abram here prepares this contract with God. God wants to convince him, I will be with you. I am going to guarantee this future. Just come along with me. Prepare the road, and we'll go together. And then nothing happens. Nothing happens. Everything is prepared, and Abram is just looking at the situation, and then instead of God coming to take this sacrifice and to acknowledge the deal, they're just predators, and they're trying to steal the carcasses, and Abram has to chase them away, but he stays put. He's like, I don't understand why nothing is happening. I'm just going to wait. And then it gets dark. And according to the story, he falls into a trance. He falls asleep. He has a dream, who knows? But what is more important is how he feels. This trance opens him up to all his anxiety, all his fears. And it is not just dark because the sun is setting, but it's dark on the inside. This story tries to help us understand his mindset. If God is not here, he's not answering my prayers, my future is gone. I have nothing left. I left everything behind. I now sacrificed my animals. And what do I get in return? Nothing. So it's this fear of being abandoned that is so obvious in this story. And it's something that we can all relate to. We've all been there. And many people, especially also the people that we pray for in this Mass, when we think of the situation in Ukraine, how many of those people are going through a similar night, an internal night, where they are afraid that the future is taken away forever, and there's only darkness ahead. So anyway, that is Abraham's fear. But then, when the night is total, when the sun has completely set, there is a sign from the heaven. There is a moment that immediately removes all fear, because God himself is going through those animals, is walking that path that symbolizes the path to the future that he wants to go with Abraham. And it's a symbolic apparition of God in the form of light and fire, warmth, heat, that consumes fear, that chases away the darkness, that prepares these gifts. And maybe it just smelled very good, I don't know. But anyway, it is the proof that God, even though sometimes for reasons that are not shared with us, takes his time to answer our prayers. He does answer them, and he is there to acknowledge the sacrifice that Abraham has made and to show him that he will be with Abraham from now on till the realization of all those promises. It's a super important story. It's not by accident that this is part of the book of Genesis, like it's kind of the blueprint of what this adventure between God and us is all about. From our point of view, we're asked to trust, to sacrifice. And there goes the camera again. I have to always trust that this camera will continue to work, even though it just gets dark for a second or two. If you're listening to the audio version of this homily in the podcast feed, so every Sunday, this camera just shuts off in the middle of the homily, and then it switches on again. We are asked to trust that God will answer our prayers, that he will be with us, and he always fulfills his promise. That's what you should remember of this first reading. And then in the second big reading, well, we have 3 readings, but in the gospel reading, there is a similar situation of tension where the future is very uncertain. Jesus is going to Jerusalem, but it's not to celebrate Easter. It is to become himself the sacrificial lamb, to be slaughtered, to be killed, and to rise again on the 3rd day. But there is this increase of tension and of danger in the situation. There are more and more confrontations. In the beginning, everybody was super enthusiastic, but more and more people are starting to oppose the message of Christ, starting to try to trick Jesus into saying the wrong things. They're plotting ways in which they can take this guy out. And of course, the apostles, the followers of Jesus, are equally concerned about what this will have in terms of implications for their own safety, for their own family, for their own friends. So there is fear that is underneath this story. But then Jesus takes a few of these apostles up on the mountain, and when they are there, he is transfigured. He starts to shine light from within. And there are 2 people from the old stories that appear next to him. It's Elijah, the most famous prophet, and Moses, who in many ways was a precursor of Jesus. And he talks with them as if they are alive. And he talks about this upcoming, trip to Jerusalem and everything that's going to happen. He talks about the future that his apostles are dreading. They, in the meantime, have fallen asleep. And when they wake up, at first, it's like, wow, we should stay here. And Peter is making this proposition of let's build some tents. But then there is this cloud, and it darkens the sky. And all of a sudden, the fear is back. When the light disappears, fear takes over. When darkness falls, that's when we are most afraid. That's why kids are always afraid in the dark. I am too. It's because it creates this atmosphere where we're thinking of the worst that can happen. And so, in the middle of this fear, where all of a sudden, where is this light? It was just so beautiful, and now it's all dark, and there's this fog that prevents us from seeing the future. It's at this moment when the apostles are most afraid that God starts to speak. Just as God appeared in the deepest darkness of Abraham when he was most afraid, that's when God revealed himself. Here it's the same thing. When they don't see anything anymore, God is there and he speaks. And he says words that are very reminiscent of the words that they heard when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist at the river the Jordan. And here that same voice is heard from the sky and says, "This is my son, my beloved son. Listen to him." And the word listening, of course, in the Bible also always means trust. Trust him. Follow him. Let him guide you by his words and by his voice. Don't be afraid. And when the cloud is lifted, Jesus is there with them alone. And they have no idea why that happened, but later on they will remember. They will remember that in the depths of their darkness and fear, when they couldn't see the future anymore because of this fog, this cloud, God was there. Just as he will be later on in their despair, when they have lost Jesus, when all hope seems to be gone. There is this sign on Easter morning of the resurrection, where Jesus appears, the sun starts to shine again, and God has fulfilled his promise. Jesus has experienced what he had predicted. After 3 days, even though they kill me, after 3 days, I will rise again. It happens just as it was promised. To wrap things up, how amazing would it be to get signs like that in our times, when the future of an entire country is now in jeopardy because of the war, where neighboring countries of Ukraine are also more and more afraid. Is this going to stop? Are we next? Where the stability of our entire world order is threatened by the consequences of this war. It's a total shift in political relationships, in economic stability, even religious connections and relationships are shattered and reformed and reshaped. Everything is moving right now. And we don't know what the implications will be. These are very, very scary times, and oftentimes we deal with that fear by trying to shield ourselves, by not following the news, by trying not to think of it. But this is a bitter reality that the people in Ukraine and the people in the surrounding countries cannot walk away from. It's for them a reality that they have to deal with in one way or another. And how wonderful would it be if again God would speak and He would show us that He is there, that no matter what happens, He's going to save us. Who wouldn't want to have a sign from heaven right now? And we may get disappointed or discouraged when we keep praying and nothing seems to improve. Why pray if it doesn't help? Why can't God just send a couple of millions of angels to just solve this, right? Where is God in these moments of darkness? Well, you probably can guess where I'm going with this. God is there in the middle of our darkness. God is there with the people in Ukraine. God is even there among the soldiers that are attacking. And He's trying to reach their hearts. Because God never gives up on anyone. He will keep trying until the bitter end, just like Jesus has shown. So I believe that God is involved in our situation right now. However, He does not appear at the time or in the way that we imagine it, that we would plan it. Just like Abraham prepares everything and has certain expectations about what's to happen, and God does something completely unexpected. Just like in the situation of Jesus, where God answers Jesus' prayer, "Father, where are you?" 3 days late. You know, all this darkness, all this suffering, the death has to happen first, and then God will answer. So it's not up to us to decide for God how He should act. But there are signs, there are moments that we can feel His presence. I will give you 2 examples where, if you look closely, you may actually see something of God's presence. One is this woman who was photographed when she was near the now ruins of that maternity hospital that was bombed and where, well, some people died. Thankfully, also a lot of people survived. But this woman went to that hospital pregnant. She was about to deliver her baby. And she was then photographed after the attack. And she was attacked again in the media by certain Russian sources, accusing this woman of being an actress, of being basically fake. She wasn't pregnant, etc., etc. Well, a few days later, we saw another photo of this woman. And she is lying on an improvised bed. She has a blanket, and next to her is her newborn baby, her newborn daughter. And the woman she's smiling. You can see that there's peace in her heart, even though the situation couldn't be more stressful. But she smiles because her daughter is there. And she apparently chose a beautiful name for her daughter, Veronica. And according to some of the news agencies that I follow, that is a name that symbolizes the victory, maybe, but there's also another reference in that name, and that is a reference to Veronica in the Passion of Jesus, who is there when Jesus walks by carrying his cross, and she goes to him with this blanket or this piece of cloth, and she wipes away the blood and the sweat and the tears of Jesus. And the image on that piece of cloth is a vera icona in Latin, hence the name Veronica. It's an imprint of the suffering of Jesus. And it's also a sign of her compassion and her consolation in the middle. I mean, how wonderful is that for a human being to bring consolation to God himself who is suffering there. That was one moment where I thought, that child is God himself, who also became a child, a human child, who was born in the middle of the night, in the darkness, just as this child is born in the middle of a war, to remind us that if we want to understand God's plan and God's future that he has in store for us, look at that child. That child is an example for all of us, especially for those that forget that we are called to be children of God. That's one sign. The second one is a YouTube video that you may have seen. And it's filmed in the first week of the attacks on Ukraine. And it shows a situation where a number of families are huddled together in an underground shelter. This is during those first bombings. And it shows you, it's a dark room, it's very cramped, there are way too many people in there. Everybody is afraid. There is only one light bulb on the ceiling. And, well, you don't hear it in the video itself, but you can imagine the sound of the bombs falling in the vicinity. And in the middle of that fear, the guy who's holding the phone turns to the right, and there's this girl. And she starts to sing. And she starts to sing the song of the most famous song of the movie Frozen, Let It Go. And she's singing it in Romanian. So it's a localized version of that. But you immediately, of course, recognize the melody and you know the words by heart. Let it go. The cold doesn't bother me anymore. The cold didn't bother me anyway. It's this song about basically this girl, Elsa, who during her childhood has always been forced to hide who she truly was and her magic, because out of fear, her entire childhood was in the grips of fear. But she longs for a world in which she can be free, and she creates that world for herself. And later on, of course, there will be an even better version of that world. But this song is about hope, about a future without fear, a future where she can be free. And this little girl in the shelter is singing that song. The impact of that song in that particular moment, unbelievable. That song becomes an anthem for anyone who is affected by this war. And if this child can continue to sing of hope and of freedom, and that she's not afraid of the cold, if a child can do it, we can all do that. We can all hope. And I truly believe that that child, in that particular moment, was singing with the voice of an angel, not just because of the quality of her singing, but because this is what angels sing in heaven. They sing about freedom. They sing about hope. They sing about God who is there. And if we hear, if we open our ears, if we open our eyes, if we open our heart, we will hear those words. We will hear that music, and it will lift us up. It will help us to forget the sound of the war and the bombs that are falling. The only thing that matters in that moment is this song that transports us to the future, that gives us hope, that helps us believe that this darkness, this overwhelming violence is not the final word, but that the future is for those who will keep singing, who will keep believing that there's going to be an end to this frozen cold of fear, of violence, that there will be a future filled with the glow of warmth and the comforting presence of God's light among us.